Hello, this is Spiros. This is the first video of a series of videos that will be examining the history of reflexology. I will begin with a question towards my fellow reflexologists, and it goes like this. Is the history of reflexology, the one that you were taught at school, one that you know real, concrete, is it complete? Finally, can the history that you were taught be verified with references? I will show you what the results of my personal research into the history of reflexology have produced. I am sure it will irritate quite a few reflexologists, since I will begin by presenting proof that the Chinese never did any sort of foot massage or reflexology. But I challenge these irritated reflexologists to prove me wrong, to prove the opposite. My intention is not to put down the Chinese or other ethnicities' contribution to the history of reflexology, nor to propose that only the Greeks or Romans were the first to practice a form of reflexology. On the contrary, I think all civilizations practice a form of reflexology. But if a method does not have a fundamental history, the following questions will arise. How is it possible to be considered reliable and tested in time? From where will modern reflexologists know which mistakes not to repeat and which correct to repeat? If one does not know his own history, how is it possible to speculate the future? And there is always the risk of jeopardizing our credibility, not to mention that as a European reflexologist, I do not like the idea of being belittled or undervalued when compared to Chinese reflexologists. For the latter, you will understand in a while. Seeking the truth about where and how reflexology began, we will encounter in various sources, these being reflexology books, research papers on reflexology, information from the internet, things we read in the media, more or less the same story. The story goes something like this. In research papers, commonly we read, the supposed theoretical support for reflexology has been developed since ancient Chinese and Egyptian times. Reflexology originated in China about 4000 BC. Reflexology, a popular therapy in the UK, is believed to originate in China over 5,000 years ago. Last reference added 1,000 years, just like that. In books, for example, in Inga Dugan's book, Reflexology is Eastern in origin and is congruent with the principle of organ representation from traditional Chinese medicine. The whole represents itself in the parts. Online, from the page of The Observer, we can read, over 5,000 years ago, the Cherokee of North America practiced reflexology. Other ethnicities across China, India, and Japan also practiced the art. I love this part. Today, the best reflexologists are said to be from China, implying that the Chinese are better than American, European, Australian reflexologists just because it began over there. Observer probably took the last piece of information from the Wikipedia page, because again there we read more or less the same. And though, as we can see, citations are needed, we continue to support these claims without professionalism nor shame. Here's another example from a research paper that is usually signed by doctors of medicine. Massage of the hands and feet is described in ancient Chinese and Egyptian texts. Texts? Where are these texts? I have never read any kind of text that describe practice of reflexology. And I will ask you, is this not jeopardizing our credibility as a science we wish to be when you read this kind of stuff in research papers? This journey on examining the history of reflexology began in 2007 when I met Anthony Porter, a famous English reflexologist. He was the first person to tell me that the Chinese never practiced any form of foot massage or reflexology. He found this out when he visited China in the 1960s. But this is a story it's better for him to tell you. In 2008, I attended a seminar that was given by Professor Dr. Bai-Xin Hua. The interesting thing about this professor is that whatever he said, he backed it up with references. So I went over and asked him, if he can recall any references of foot massage or reflexology in Chinese traditional texts. And he said that he had never encountered any such information, and that foot massage has always been associated with sex. The man on the right is a successful businessman. His name is Zhu Guofan. And the Forbes magazine hosted an article on him in the October issue of 2010. At one point in the article, he describes when he first opened the first foot massage parlor of his franchise called Lianji. Foot massage was considered a business of well-being, separate from the treatments that were always a part of traditional Chinese medicine. In the middle of the year 1990, 60% of foot massage parlors, he said, in China were associated with sex. The picture on the left is a picture from the training his workers undergo as reflexologists. Interesting approach, don't you think? In 2010, I interviewed Wataru Ohashi and took the opportunity to ask him also about foot massage in Japan. Wataru Ohashi has an interesting chapter in his book, Reading the Body, on toe reading and reflexology, by the way. Wataru told me that the Japanese never practiced foot massage. It was also associated with sex. The interesting thing is that the Chinese are onto something here. If we examine this association of sex and the feet on a neurological level, we will observe that the dermatomes of the genitals and the feet share the same neurological level. Also on the Penfield's homunculus, which you see on the left, we will see again that the feet and the genitals are represented in the same region. In 2011, I wrote an email to Mr. Giovanni Maciocia. This is an important figure in traditional Chinese medicine. He is considered an authority in traditional Chinese medicine. And something that is very special about him is that he can read Chinese. So he had an access to the original Chinese texts. I asked this man also if he had ever encountered references of some form of foot massage or reflexology. He too answered that he had never encountered any such sort of references. He also added that he always thought that reflexology came from India. In 1977, Father Joseph Oogster began reflexology in Malaysia. It took his name, which is Ruo Shor, and this is the name of the method until today. He also began barefoot walking. I have references that ancient Greeks practiced this modality, but it's not the topic today, so I will produce the evidence at another occasion. Years ago, I followed the full training of Sujok. This is a form of reflexology practiced in Korea. I found it very interesting that though I did 6 levels of training, and they have both maps of feet and hand, we never practiced on the feet. We always practiced on the hands. I think it also has something to do with Shaki. This is poison arrows. You can follow up on this through Feng Shui. Last, I find it very interesting that the practice of foot binding ceased in 1949. Is there ever a possibility that reflexologists would treat the feet this way, as did the Chinese? Please observe the picture, bottom left, and you will notice that the 5th toe, which is in the 5th zone, of course, has reached the 2nd zone. And please observe the arch of the foot on the old lady. You can see what happens to the arch of the foot on the right picture. Now, thinking about foot binding, it makes sense why I hear that the Chinese are known for their aggressive approach. We got an example of this from the Amazing Race reality show a couple of years ago. As you can see on the upper right picture, the woman is in agony. So the question arises, why did this happen? Why were the Chinese considered the originators of reflexology? I believe it happened because when the first reflexologists began writing books or practicing the method, they had to support it with references. Since this was very difficult back then, they attributed it all to the Chinese. There was no internet back then, there was a language barrier, and the Chinese were known for using unusual methods of treatment. So back then it was all right, but I don't think it's good enough today. Our best reference to the history of reflexology is the book from Christine Issel, Reflexology, Art, Science, and History. In this book, only 2 references are made to the contributions of the Greek. They are from Dr. Joe Shelby Riley, and he states in the first reference, "The science you are here going into is as old as Egypt. It was known to the ancient Egyptians and Greeks, and to ancient Arabia." Further down, he says, "So it migrated from Egypt to Greece, from Greece to Arabia, and then on to Europe through the Roman Empire." I question which civilization is older, Greek or Egypt, but neither this is our topic today. Dr. Riley, without doubt, knew something, but what was it? He doesn't make any reference to his information. Mrs. Issel's work lacks this important piece of information. So, I think I have found it, and I will show it to you on the second part of this presentation.